Hello everybody, what's up and welcome back and welcome to Crimes Untold. If you are new here, I am your host Liz. If this is actually your first time listening to me, this is my brand new podcast. I also have a YouTube channel. Go ahead and head on over to YouTube. I'll put it in my show notes below. My handle is Liz Austin. And here at Crimes Untold, I talk about different crimes that are untold, generally just not focused on all of the above. And what I have for you today is we are going to be discussing some identifieds, currently have just been identified that were recently unidentified. So we're going to be talking about different John or Jane Doe cases, and I will have multiple different installments of this as we go further in the future for this podcast or for my YouTube channel if this is your first time, tuning in. Also, I just got this brand new microphone and it's fantastic. Hence, that was one of the other hindrances for me not starting this podcast when I wanted to. Also, I got really sick. I am a mom. So if you hear any little voices in the background, it's because they are in the room with me. You're welcome. Anywho, so starting off this video, we're going to be talking about the Manistee County Jane Doe of 1997. So on October 24th of 1997 in Manistee, Michigan, a woman was found floating in Lake Michigan near the breaker wall. This woman was in a decomposing state, most likely in the putrefaction state, in which she wasn't recognizable. So during her autopsy, it was determined that she had drowned a few weeks prior to being discovered. She was approximately 5'11" and was about 200 pounds for her weight. She had pierced ears and was considered obese. And she also had an appendectomy scar on her abdomen. It is also known that she still had some orthodontia work in her mouth. What I mean by this is she had brackets on her upper central incisors or her front teeth in her mouth. So in some cases, these generalized identifying markings can help with identifying somebody, but in this case, it didn't, unfortunately. After she was recovered, they quickly ran out of leads to figure out exactly who she was, but they knew within time she would be identified. It would take quite a bit of years for her to be identified, but after years, her case would be looked at again, and her bones were deemed too degraded for any other observation, but they did try to extract some DNA. The actual process of identifying her was quick, surprisingly. They didn't believe they were going to be able to extract enough DNA to be able to do a full genome sequencing, which, through the utter surprise that this actually worked, DNA Doe Project teamed up with the Michigan State Police to identify her. Her match to a familial lead came within 1 day of her DNA genome being uploaded. So this match happened on gedmatch.com. If you don't know what it is, I'll also put that in part of my show notes down below. Or if you're on YouTube, I'll put it in the description down below. So they ended up completing the genetic map on GEDmatch as well. She was identified this year in 2023 after a positive DNA match to a family member. Dorothy Lynn Thing Ricker was 26 years old when she disappeared on October 2nd of 1997. She was missing from Chicago, Illinois. Now it's believed that she was actually vacationing on Lake Michigan in Wisconsin the last time she was seen alive. And her car was also found shortly after the last sighting of her as well. So she was reported missing approximately 3 weeks prior to her being discovered, and is believed that she went skinny dipping in Lake Michigan and got caught in a current, and she ended up drowning. Her death is believed to not be suspicious, but details are still kind of up in the air as to what really happened to her. Number 2 for today's video, we're going to be talking about the Somerset County Jane Doe of 1987. So in October of 1987, a tractor trailer crashed at the 119.4 mile marker in Stony Creek Township. After it crashed, the vehicle then burst into flames. In this tractor trailer, there was 2 occupants. One male that was identified as 57-year-old Edward Pratt from Fontana, California, but the female couldn't be identified. Pratt was not supposed to have a passenger in his truck due to him being on the job at the time of his accident. It is entirely possible and quite yet plausible that Pratt just simply stopped and picked this woman up from a truck stop nearby where the accident occurred to just give her a ride to the next truck stop. It's entirely plausible. We read about it all the time, we hear about it all the time, that this indeed could have happened. When all attempts to identify her didn't pan out, they entered her case into NamUs, and her case would reside there under the title UP16596 for over 3 decades. August of 2022, there was an agreement that was made with the Pennsylvania Turnpike Commission that they pay for the genetic testing to be done for the Somerset County Jane Doe, and her DNA then would be sent to Othram by the Pennsylvania State Police, or PSP as they are known, not the gaming console, the actual Pennsylvania State Police. So after they built her genome, they were able to determine that the Somerset County Jane Doe was that of Linda Jean McClure, who was 26 years old at the time of her death. She was from Indiana, Pennsylvania. So to help completely confirm this, her brother also submitted a DNA sample for comparison. After this test came back as a match, it then was let out that she was not reported by her family, and the last time they spoke to her was in the later 1980s. So her case has been closed due to her death being caused due to a tractor-trailer accident. Number 3 on our list for today is the Mojave Jane Doe. So on January 23rd of 1971, a white cotton canvas sack was found in the Mojave Desert on a ranch near Kingman, Arizona. Inside was the remains of a deceased female. It was determined that she was between 25 to 40 years old. She was approximately 5'4" and weighed between 125 to 140 pounds. Her hair was curly and brown. This woman had a scar on her abdomen. She had meticulous manicure, and she had a bone indentation on one of her fingers, which could be from a prior accident that happened when she was younger, but she had her fingerprints, DNA, and dental records put on file, and her exact cause of death has never actually been released, and her death is considered a homicide. Another cool thing I'm quite confused about is how nobody used what she was wearing, plus with how she was maintained to help aid in her probable identification. So she was wearing white socks, white laced underwear, black pixie-style leather boots called Friskies, a set of brown leather driving gloves that had Fairfield Wild Pig Small stamped on them, an orange and black blouse, a black sweater, and an orange knit stretch-style symphony pants. So these seemed quite, not like outlandish, but very distinctive for clothing that she would be wearing, specifically in the time that she was found. Like in 1971, that does not, for me, it doesn't scream something that somebody would be wearing in the 70s. Granted, I am of a younger generation than the 1970s. I was born 20 years after this, so my ideation of what people wore in the 70s, it differs quite frankly from what other people might assume what people are wearing. So my idea of what is norm and what is not norm for people to wear during this time differs from what other people may think or assume. But anywho, so in October of 2021, the Mojave County Sheriff's Office partnered with Othram to identify this Jane Doe. And thankful to DNA Solves, which it is a Facebook page, they also raise funds for the identification of different John and Jane Doe cases. I highly recommend you look at this page. I'll put a link to it in my show notes and description down below, so you can head over to DNA Solves. That's actually where I get a lot of my information when it comes to these identified cases, because it's so readily available on there as opposed to other websites. That and some of the information actually is different on DNA Solves versus like the unidentified wiki fandom, I think that's what it's called, and then like a lot of the readily available things. Obviously we have newspaper clippings and stuff like that, but DNA Solves has a lot of very trustworthy information, and I love using it as a constant source source material for a lot of the cases that I cover. A close DNA match was found for Colleen Audrey Rice. So Colleen Rice is actually quite a mysterious woman. Not a lot is actually known about what happened to her leading up to her murder and why she ended up in Arizona. It's still also unclear if she ever had any children after she married her husband, William Davis, in 1946 in Ohio. So she was 39 at the time of her death, and she was missing from Portsmouth, Ohio. It is public knowledge that she was actually estranged from her family, so hence why there's not a lot known because of the gaps in her life. And she was missing from Portsmouth, Ohio, but there wasn't a lot of red flags that were raised when it came to her being missing. So a lot of that is really strange for me to kind of to fully grasp mentally, because typically speaking, if you have a missing family member, wouldn't you want to know what happened to them? Unless there was something detrimental that happened between her and her family, that's totally plausible as well. But on January 23rd, 2023, the Mojave Jane Doe was identified publicly on the anniversary of her discovery, just 52 years later, as Colleen Audrey Rice. Her case is still active in investigation, and they're still trying to figure out what happened to her and how she ended up in that sack. If you know, or if anyone has any information involving the case of Colleen Audrey Rice, please reach out to the Mojave County Sheriff's Office at 928-753-0753 at extension 4408. Again, please contact the Mojave County Sheriff's Office at 928-753-0753, extension 4408. Our next case on our list is the Sherman County John Doe of 1989. So in March of 1989, a group of people were rafting in the John Day River when they came upon a set of skeletonized remains. So these remains were partially buried in a silt on the riverbank, which consisted of many long bones and some small bones. So this set of remains was incomplete due to the skeletal state, and it's believed and it's entirely possible that wild critters just kind of grabbed some of the bones and moved them around. Wildlife will do that if they see things, or if there's still meat on said bones, they will move them around, scavenge them, you know what I mean. So this, in particular, the skull of this set of remains was then scanned, and what was found was transported to the State Medical Examiner's Office of Oregon for further examination. So it was determined that this was a Caucasian male between 5'6" and 5'9" in height, around 50 years of age, and they found evidence of a compressed vertebra, specifically in the lumbar portion of the vertebra, and it's believed that this John Doe suffered from arthritis, or possibly suffered from arthritis in his lifetime. So on the mandible of the skull, they also saw that there was restoration work done to the bone, or possibly could have been from dental work. There was another search done in March after the initial discovery, and another subsequent one done in April of 1989 as well. These searches also yielded some more small bones, and several teeth were found as well. So the investigators worked on different leads, and they figured out who this was. So luckily, there was actually a bunch of reports from Sherman County, and it was believed that this was David Sherman Jr. He was 47 at the time he disappeared from Sherman County while he was trying to cross the river during a flood in 1964. So it was also known that he would go back and forth across this river in order to make sure that cattle got fed near Ashwood, Oregon. That day he disappeared, it was seen that the cable car he used to get across the river had been washed away in the flooding, and there was a tree that had been uprooted. This tree in particular held the cable to the car, and David Sherman's dog was seen injured on the bank of the river, and he seemed super agitated, but he was never seen again. In April of 2022, a sample from his bone fragments was sent to Othram for analysis. They were then able to create a genome and a family tree with potential family members. After running the DNA test, they then were able to identify his family about a positive identification. As of now, this case is still shrouded in mystery, but the family is happy that he has been found. Next on our list is the Seminole County Jane Doe of 1985. So with the help of DNA sequencing, the Seminole County Jane Doe was publicly identified in February 2023 of this year. This Jane Doe had died on June 1st of 1985, and back in October of 2022, the law enforcement and agencies in the area sent out her DNA for testing. In May of 1985, Mary Cowan was living with her children in Seminole County. Her son Daniel, who was 7 at the time, remembers his mother's yellow Toyota getting stuck in the sand on a sandy road. He had called a friend to come and help her get her car out, but the same friend couldn't go out that night, so her car would have to wait. Daniel couldn't remember the day or the name of the road that this happened on, but finally the family would be able to return home to wait for her car to get unstuck. So Daniel remembers vividly that his mother was cooking dinner one evening in May of 1985, when she was just simply gone. Her purse and ID were on the counter, and everything just kind of seemed normal. Kind of like she had stepped out just really quickly and would be home soon. But then he peered outside and he saw her car, but there was no sign of his mother in the car, anywhere outside, anywhere inside. As the family would continue searching for her, they wouldn't find anything. But on May 24th of 1985, a Jane Doe would be found about 500 miles away off of the Interstate 91 north in Newton, Georgia. She was found unresponsive in a ditch and suffered from pretty severe trauma to her entire body. This Jane Doe would be brought to a hospital in Albany, in which she would die just 8 days later, on June 1st of 1985. At the hospital, she was deemed Jane Doe due to no identification on her, and her headstone would read the same as well. Jane Doe, June 1st, 1985. So the family of Mary Cowan would continue to search for her at the time of her disappearance, and it's the same time that GBI, or Georgia Bureau of Investigation, would try and track down the family of this Jane Doe. So, parallel, they were searching at the same time. Obviously, they didn't know they were looking for the same exact person, but they would come to this realization years later. So, they would take a look back on this Jane Doe, and it would bring us to September 21st of 2012. They would exhume her body for further testing. A part of her bone would be taken and was sent for isotope testing, but there was no leads that generated from this, unfortunately. But if we fast forward to March of 2022, this is when the Georgia Bureau of Investigation stated they would complete a DNA analysis on this Jane Doe, and they would use samples that were extracted back in 2012 and send it to Othram. So all in all, it took Othram 10 months to build a profile for this Jane Doe, which then led them to Baker County. They then were able to track a profile to that of Mary Anja Cowan. She was missing. The GBI reached out to the Cowan family for a comparison in January of 2023. So after the match, the family was notified about what exactly happened to their missing loved one and the picture of the Jane Doe prior to her death. Her exact manner of death is undetermined, but it is determined that she had a subdural hematoma that she died from that they believed is caused by blunt force trauma. But they are entirely unsure about what caused it. At this time, her case is still being investigated, but her family is happy that they finally have answers as to what happened to their loved one. So that, my friends, is our next installment of Identified in 2023. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you guys in my next video.